Hello and welcome to episode 80 of the Garden Log with me, Ben Darg. I am speaking to you from early June 2020. The weather here has just changed. We now have clouds and hail and little squally bits of wind to replace what has been an exceptionally long, dry and hot spring, the driest ever recorded here in southern England. Everything is looking distinctly high fried summer-like. I went through a run earlier around Peckham Rye, my local park, and the Sexby garden there is looking full of June magnificence, full of phlomis and roses and lush flowering growth. So it's strange then to see next to it the bowling green looking bleached white and dead, with even some ominous crows hopping slowly across it. These are the times we live in now. This episode, though, is the antithesis of a dried out bowling green. It is full of boggy plants, of lush flower spikes. I am planting things. I am planting a vast order of herbaceous material that arrived in the garden. I go through some of the things I've put in place and talk about why I've chosen each particular plant and what effect I hope it will achieve. I'm also talking a little bit about the development of our wildflower meadow, an update now that the meadow is entering a second period of maturity, now that the plant communities are really starting to get their elbows out and fight one another. I give a little bit of war reporting from the front line of that particular conflict. It's quite a long episode, so I'm not going to spend any more time on this introduction. Instead, I will see you on the other side of the jangly music for the week in gardening. Welcome to the week in gardening, a week that began in tortuous heat and finished in thunderous rain. In between, we gardeners scurried around with our trowels and our shovels, putting in a giant order of herbaceous plants that had arrived at the end of the previous week. This was an order that had been foremost in my mind for some time. I managed to get it in with a wholesale nursery towards the beginning of lockdown, and I had a wonderful soap opera of updates along the way of drivers furloughed, of picking staff gone to the plague hospital. But eventually it is with us, and I have to say the plants are fantastic in terms of their health. I think they're also fantastic in terms of their selection, for which my colleagues and I can claim some credit. These were picked out to fill specific needs within the garden on the main, but there are a couple of plants that we just shoved onto the order at the end because they are such fantastic and interesting members of the plant kingdom that they will make any garden better, and having them there almost forces you to find a use for them. It's a rather profligate way to go about filling a garden, but one that I think produces some interesting results. I won't list the order from top to bottom. I could read to you from the sales invoice. I won't do that. I'll talk you through which plants we planted on each days and the intention behind the plantings we laid down. On Monday, we began by planting some hardy geraniums. This is Geranium Sirak, which is a hybrid geranium with a very good compact mound of magenta flowers. It almost looks like the classic Geranium Fame flower, but it is smaller and the ratio of flower to leaf is far greater on this particular hybrid cultivar. And we got 20 of those to fill in gaps. And 20 plants doesn't seem like a lot in a garden our size, but each does a huge amount of work within the border. particularly the kind of work that these ones were doing, which is the infilling, mingling sort of work. A lot of them are going down in shady beds that are fairly full with Geum totally tangerine, which is a very bright, classic Fanta orange Geum. It already looks sugary and sweet, and the temptation is to tone that down. And in parts of the garden we've toned it down with great mounds of Hachnocloa macra and with plain green-leaved hostas. But sometimes I think it is wise to rush headlong towards diabetes. We are already in the grips of a sugar binge. Why not make things even more bubblegum sweet? So putting these purpley pinks in to complement that orange, I think will add to that jolly, vibrant feel. It's a colour combination that appeals to me this year. Funny how we go through different tastes as the seasons change. I really like the purple and orange at the moment. We have this quite interesting bed of Viola cornata, the purple form of that, the normal form, and primula, candelabra primula, poking up above that understory. And it's unbelievably artificial. It looks nothing like something you would see on a roadside verge. Looks nothing like something you'd see in a slab of the Welcome to Yorkshire garden at the Chelsea Flower Show. It looks entirely confected because it's confectionery, and I've really been enjoying that. And I think that the GM Sirak with those totally tangerine will work very well. The second part of our planting on Monday was planting some bearded iris. This is a cultivar called Dusky Challenger, and we put in 30 or so of those in front of a vast boulder, this huge great lump of blue-grey stone that came down to us from Wales on its own articulated lorry. And this has ended up on the edge of a rockery with a thin bed separating it from the lawn. And it's very hard to work out what to do. I mean, the answer is to not have a thin bed. The answer is to lose more lawn and to do a more gradual step down. But unfortunately, gardens, like most things, are full of competing stakeholders. And there is quite a healthy lawn lobby who are battling my plans to do away with the grass. And the lawn lobby has won out. The lawn must stay. So we end up with this little thin bed. And I think that here, the iris is perfect. You don't want anything small, anything bedding plant size, because it will look dwarfed. It will look like something apocalyptic, like something from the cover of a fantasy novel of a town about to be overwhelmed by a dragon or a tsunami. You want something that has a boldness and vigour in its own right. And for that you want something taller, but tall things grown in narrow beds next to large stones tend to flop. They flop away from the stone because naturally the stone is going to be blocking the light. Iris won't do that. They will stand upright, and they have that brilliant glaucous sword-like leaf which almost seems in conflict with the stone. It will not be bullied by it. Of course, anyone who has played rock, paper, scissors will know that the scissor blade, those spiky iris leaf type blades, are the natural enemy of the stone, even if the stone does normally win out against them. And so that's the poetic reasoning for putting those in there. And the bed looks wonderful, filled up with the zigzagging iris leaves. And the flowers are almost a bonus. But on Dusky Challenger, they are a magnificent bonus. They are vast, the flowers. They are almost absurdly large for an iris flower. And they are dark, dark purple. They look like the sun is setting on a box of Cadbury's milk tray. But they smell better than milk tray. They smell sweet and ungent and strongly irisy. You don't realise that iris has such a distinctive fragrance until you get a really, really scented cultivar. And then you go, that's what it is. That's what I smelt in those herbaceous borders all those years ago. I'm very pleased with the effect of those. I have a feeling that they will probably die badly, the flowers. Anything with such a great warped and ruffled mass of flowers is going to suffer when it comes into contact with raindrops. They'll probably end up like the peony flowers near them, with their stems plastered down with their own floral effluence. Anyway, that was Monday's planting. On Tuesday, we took a different direction. We're planting lots and lots of Ligularia, and this is Ligularia Zepter, which is an utterly fantastic cultivar. My favourite Ligularia by a long, long way. These are plants that appreciate a wet soil, and I think you can tell somehow by looking at them that they like a wet soil. They have an almost aquatic nature to them. The way their big, heavily serrated, lily pad-like leaves waft up on very thin stems and then settle themselves horizontally like floating leaves on top of a pond. I often think they look like the leaves of a water lily which hasn't quite hit the surface yet, so the leaves aren't all on one plane. They are still rising towards the water level. So when we see these Ligularia, we are watching them from the perspective of a little newt on the bottom of the flower bed. Zepter has a very tall spike of yellowy orange flowers. It looks almost like an asphodeline spike, but obviously it doesn't have the asphodeline leaves. Asphodeline leaves are very narrow, blade-like leaves. These are far more lush and tropical looking. And I'm planting it in a boggy bit of semi-shade. Really, they like full sun, like many bog plants. If you think about a bog, it tends to be wet under soil, but doesn't have any trees or coverings around it. But I think in full sun, they tend to yellow a little bit. And part of the joy in these plants is they have very, very dark leaves, particularly around where the leaf stem, the petiole, joins the leaf proper. It's almost black there. And I think that's a very, very pleasing effect. The area is almost an artificial bog garden. There's a piece of busted irrigation in there, which means that it stays very, very wet, and there is an almost artificial pond construction at the end where it hits a bit of terracing that doesn't let the water escape. And I've lost a few things in there. I've lost quite a few Corsican hellebores, which were to be almost the architectural spiky-leafed plant of choice for that bed. But I don't really mind, because this piece of poor plumbing has created a habitat we don't have anywhere else in the garden. So I'm not going to get it fixed. Instead, I will put in plants like the Zepter. There's lots of other wet-favouring plants in there. Particularly fantastic in that bed have been the white Camassia this year. They have been looking utterly gorgeous. They've just gone over into 2 columns of seed at the moment, but they look gorgeous in there, and they've been in there for a couple of years, bulking up very well in this soup of tap water and mulch. After they were settled happily in the ground, we moved on to planting some Rodgersia aesculifolia, which is named after the horse chestnut genus Aesculus, because the leaves look remarkably similar to the leaves of a horse chestnut. If you imagine a horse chestnut that has been coppiced hard and heavy, and we actually have a couple of those in the garden, that is almost the effect you get when you see Rodgersia aesculifolia in full leaf. The leaves can get absolutely vast if it's kept moist in full sun, and it has a beautiful plume of flowers, one of those feathery astilbe-like plumes, but on a far grander, larger scale. I'm putting these in as a sub-canopy around some of the taller tropicals in the tropical garden, particularly around the Musa bastu, which has been growing exceptionally well from the little rescue plants I found at a bargain table a few years ago. Now some of the rollers are coming out at 12 foot in the air. My colleague is brilliant at protecting bananas and building banana protective structures, so they have retained their pseudostems for the last 2 winters. Such was the quality of construction that they would have survived, no doubt, in deepest, darkest Siberia, but I doubt there were many bananas killed off, particularly Musa bastu, by the mild winter we had last year. Anyway, they're very, very tall, and I want something to be growing at about 5 or 6 foot around them. Not all around them, because then we'd lose the point of having a towering plant like that, but as almost a backdrop. And I think these plants are going to work very well, particularly as I like to keep my bananas very wet. They will benefit from the runoff from all of those overfed banana nutrients. On Wednesday, we took a little bit of time away from planting and went to check on the meadow that we have been managing for a good couple of years now. And it's time to check on what is really coming up. We can still remember what came up earlier in the year, and the rosettes of what is to come are now evident, so we can see if things are improving, if the biodiversity has increased. I'm certain it has. We have all sorts of stuff that weren't around before. We have Dyer's Weld for the first time, which is almost a plant I associate with wasteland more than meadowland. It is a sort of ruderal weed of abandoned quarries. And parts of the meadow are heading towards that direction, I'm afraid to say. We haven't been taken over by dock and thistle because we've been digging them out, but the yellow rattle has been exceptionally successful. Yellow rattle is that little semi-parasitic plant that everyone advises you, well, you must establish yellow rattle if you're looking for a decent wildflower meadow, a proper grass and wildflower mix, because it weakens the vigour of the grass and gives your forbs, your flowering plants, a greater chance of setting seed. And sometimes I had rolled my eyes when I heard people espousing this theory. You think to yourself, that's one of those pieces of makes sense in scientific literature, therefore I'll apply it to the garden and tell people it's true, and they will pass it on, and we'll Chinese whisper it until it is horticultural gospel. Almost like mycorrhizal fungi, which I'm sure have a brilliant basis in science, but I can't quite see any evidence for in my own plantings. Here, with the yellow rattle, I can 100% say it is incredibly effective. Almost too effective. Now, in the areas where the yellow rattle is the dominant plant, the grass is weak and wimpy and insipid. It looks like lawn grass left while the householder spends a couple of weeks jollying it up in France. It's that sort of length. And the soil is almost exposed. The sun has beaten down in these parts. And there's a blackish hay colour to the ground here, whereas the bits where the grass retains its vigour are still green, and they still have the remnants of cow parsley hanging around them. The other thing that I really should have done more research about yellow rattle, I just took it as read that yellow rattle is the magic plant that attacks grass and leaves flowers. But it doesn't. I've been reading the papers. It attacks everything. You can get yellow rattle growing on ash and poplar roots and trying to suck the energy out of them. I mean, good luck taking down a poplar, but they'll try. It grows on a huge amount of legumes, and I like legumes in my wildflower meadows. I like my vetches and my trefoils and my little tiny wild magenta peas, and I think that it might diminish their quantity a little bit. The studies are inconclusive because obviously grass outcompetes legumes as well. Some studies show that there is a decrease in leguminous plants. Some show that there is an increase in leguminous plants. What the studies all show is a vast decrease in grass-like plants, or graminoids in ecology speak, and a huge increase in forb species. And forb is the non-grass flowering plants. So it will have that effect eventually. It's just that in the meantime it looks almost leprous. It doesn't seem to attack ladies' bed straw, which we're going to have a huge crop of coming up very soon. I don't want to give the wrong impression. This is seeing the meadow from a hypercritical gardener's eye perspective. It still looks 1,000 times better than it did a few years ago when the grass grew lush and then dreadlocked itself flat to the ground. Now there are huge amounts of oxeye daisies for the first year. There are campion in great quantities, huge amounts of geraniums, of meadow geraniums, of buttercups, of everything else. The meadow is gorgeous, but as always, I think it could be better. I think that the rattle will travel around, will roll around over the years. It will become, in the language of the day, endemic to the meadow. But we are probably at the peak, at the spike, and the curve will slowly flatten over the coming years, and it will get itself into a more established ratio with the rest of the plants. I should, of course, be celebrating how easy the mowing is going to be this year. Anyway, that was Wednesday morning. In the afternoon, we planted some stuff out. I planted a brilliant lead urn underneath a big mature silver birch, a Youngi cultivar, one of those weeping cultivars. And this Youngi specimen is as big as Youngi can get. So you have almost a curtain of birch leaves all around it, a thin curtain, and then space underneath. And in this space is a lead urn. And into that I popped a load of white Centranthus rubare. Centranthus is the valerian. You see it growing all the time and in hedgerows and ruins and castles and cracks in stone. It normally comes in a beautiful pink, deep pink when it comes out, that fades as time goes on. In the hedgerows now it is much more subtle than it was, and it has a glaucous leaf in opposite pairs with a lovely little point to it. The white form is a little less wild, a little less Tintin Abbey than the other one, but it has its uses. And I like it here because it is tall and it doesn't ever flop. And it is very useful in these situations when you have a tall urn. You don't want something short in a tall urn because things look out of proportion. And under a tree in this part of the garden, you don't want to do a classic bedding urn planting with those horticultural staples of a plant to fill, a plant to thrill, and a plant to spill. That is, a plant to thrill being something like a cordyline, australialis, with big spiky leaves, a plant to fill, a pansy or something, and a plant to spill, a petunia or a trailing lobelia. You don't want any of that. That's too fussy. That would look weird in this part of the garden. Better to have one type of perennial to stand straight up there. And under these trees, against the white and brown of the birch trunk, this clump of Centranthus will work very well, particularly as they always lean en masse towards the light in quite an attractive flattened S shape. I think that they're going to look magical as time goes on, and when they're finished we can always chuck them out into the garden somewhere. I do use the thrill and spill and fill method in other pots, but I tend to do it in bigger pots, vast pots. We have a pot that we move around with a forklift truck that used to be the fresh water reservoir for an entire Sicilian village. It's one that you could use as a hot tub for a couple of people if it were not filled with olive trees and astelia. As you might guess, the olive trees is my thrill plant, the astelia is my fill plant against spiky silver leaves, and the spill plant there is a silver-leaved ivy. It's all very stone-baked hillside, which I think does the water tank a little bit of justice. But under the tree, it's all about my Centranthus. We also planted some of the red form around the little ruinous folly that we are building in the garden, but I'm going to talk about that on a future episode. On Thursday I was at home, relishing the opportunity not to have to get in the car and drive anywhere. I'm still not cycling. I'm still driving up the M40 every day, which I thought I would hate and I don't enjoy, but I've learned to nature watch at 70 miles an hour, which I think is a crucial skill. The trick is not to look at individual plants, it is to look at patterns. It's something that I developed in 2018. If you remember that very, very hot summer we had there, and watching the birches die along the motorway embankments. Well, not die, crisp up, give up on the summer, say, sod it, I'm going into dormancy early. And seeing, oh, there's a birch, there's a birch, there's a birch, there's a birch. Trying to work out birch per mile. It's a good game. I've been doing something similar on my drives, seeing laburnums, There's a laburnum. There's a laburnum. Remarkable amount of laburnums on the M40 corridor. I don't think that they are propagated in the classic horticultural myth of this plant arrived in a Dutch sailor's beard in 1840, and it's travelled everywhere Dutchmen drink ever since. Everywhere a locomotive engine has carried a Dutchman, this plant grows. It's none of that business, because the seeds are too large to swoosh along in that way. I'm just reminded of a trip I did this week, actually. I went out to a nursery which involved a drive on one of the very, very hot, very still days when the landscape was completely flattened by heat. Nothing was moving. All the birds had given up and said, no, thank you. I'm going to stay under my leafy canopy today. And there was nothing moving until I merged with a major road. And here lorries had stirred up all the dandelions and whipped their seeds into the air, and they were tumbling along in the wake of these giant HGVs. So it was like this moving column of fluff through the landscape, with all the rest around it aslumber. It was very nice. Anyway, that was not Thursday. I did that another day. On Thursday, I didn't do anything. I was the proverbial slumbering piece of English countryside. On Friday, I came back and did some more planting. We did some planting in a rush under heavy skies. It's wonderful to see the clouds return. I know I've mentioned this before, but gardens are done a disservice by weeks of endless blazing blue. They lose their shade and nuance. It's like faces. Faces are better with a bit of shadow. If you think of Orson Welles, or you think of Lee Van Cleef peering out from the brim of a dark cowboy hat, they add a bit of mystery and depth, those shadows. And gardens need that too. So with the clouds scurrying across and the threat of rain, everything took on a little bit more drama, which I really enjoyed. I'll race through the little bits of bitty planting we did. We put in a lot of Coreopsis grandiflora Sunray, a hugely over-the-top little plant that has dahlia button-like buds that open into dandelion, shaggy, yellow mops, using those as a bedding plant, basically, in one of the bedding areas. 20 of those. Put in 5 Cynara cardunculus, the cardoon, that big silver-leaved architectural plant. I've put that in one of the foliage beds where there are a lot of purple-leaved dahlias, because I think the silver and purple will work very nice. We put in a river of Festuca intense blue, that mounded cushion of bluegrass, and that's going in a little section of grass bed. We ripped out a load of browning old Carex from there that had started to look fit for the big Carex recycling bin at the bottom of the garden. That's the compost heap. Put in some Hosta Fortunii, Oreo marginata, some Hosta Francis William, some Hosta Crossari Girl, some Hosta Summon Substance, that very big one. Lots of hostas everywhere, all of them threatening to put up flower spikes, which I chopped off because the hosta needs to remember its place within the garden, which is to be big, beautiful leaves, and leave its flower spike business to our other things. We have the Ligularia, we have the iris, we have the Rodgersia, we have the Centranthus. We have many things for flowers, and hostas shouldn't trouble themselves about getting in on the act. They look too scrappy and half done for a plant with the dignity of a hosta. The one major bit of planting we did on Friday was to put in a huge amount of Astrantia, and this is Astrantia Gill Richardson, which is a beautiful dark Astrantia. Opens port red, almost darker than port, more like the sediment at the bottom of port, and it retains that colour at the tips of the very long-lasting flowers, but it fades through all the degrees of wine stain as the plant ages. And I planted that within a drift of 100 new steeper tenuissima ponytails, that very, very fluffy, floofy fine little grass that looks like a collection of sun rays trapped in a piece of cotton wool. And that grass will serve to almost amplify the red. The red can get lost when it is that dark and lovely in a garden full of purples and oranges and geums and geraniums. But the very fine golden grass is going to act as almost a diffuser, almost to spread the colour around, to draw the eye to it a little bit more. I think it's going to be a particularly gorgeous combination. I'm really looking forward to seeing it develop as the Astrantia push themselves up into their incredibly long flowering period. We finished the planting in absolutely torrential rain, in hailstones bouncing off and filling our shirt pockets weather, which is exciting and gratifying in a way, because you get to stagger in at the end of a hard week and toss your hair back and look dramatic and dedicated, as if you have just brought back the village lifeboat with all lives saved. And that was it. A quick towel down, and the week was over. It was back in the car to see what was in flower on the M40. Lots of dog roses, vast amounts of beautiful pink arching dog roses. Not that I could particularly see the arch, but I could imagine the arch as I whizzed past their little forms by the side of the road. Anyway, enough talk of motorways and other things. Let's see if I have any recommendations for you this week. No real recommendations this week, I'm afraid. There have been excellent things said to me about the Great Dixter lectures that Fergus Garrett has been putting on. I think they're £15 a pop. My colleague has watched the one about succession planting and about self-seeding plants, and he is a man of taste and thinks that they were worth the money, so that might be worth checking out. I haven't seen them myself. In my news, a piece of flagrant self-promotion. I'd like to tell you that the second of my exceptionally silly horticultural mysteries has been released. These are the crime-solving adventures of a 400-year-old head gardener who can talk to trees. I'm going to read you a little extract, if you would indulge me. This is the head gardener, Albus Rodgersia, talking to a tree. He's gone to talk to a yew tree that grows deep in the woods, and he's talking about a body that has been found in its branches. You have to imagine here, Albus has his head pressed against the tree's fissured bark. He is projecting his thoughts deep into the woody matter. Creaking like old stairs, the tree's voice sounded. What? Hello, I'm what? I'm what power? What power? I don't understand. What power art thou? Albus Oak from the lower meadow, I said. Oak, what power art thou? The tree was in my head. Not just its words, but its essence. My tongue was bitter and dry. I looked to the sky, and my eyes chafed in their sockets. What power art thou, who from below hast made me rise, unwilling and slow, from beds of everlasting snow? I'm a dryad. Fool, feel me, dryad, seest not how stiff and wondrous old, far unfit to bear the bitter cold? It's not that cold. It's still October for an hour, I said. But it did seem bitter. My legs and back ached, as if woodworm had dug 100,000 channels in my body and let them fill with melting ice. I could barely move or draw my breath. Go, dryad, let me freeze again to death. Death is why I need to talk to you. You would talk to me of death? I am death. You are a tree. Roots and trunk and branches. There's a nest in your twigs and several plastic bags. A fine tree, no doubt, but just a tree. No mere tree, the graveyard tree. Thou knowest not my force oak. Had thou the merest sprout of green wit, thou wouldst not meddle in my doings. I'm not meddling in your doings. I have a few questions. You must first display a worthy mind. Answer me this riddle, or I speak no more, in this century or the next. Fine, I'll solve your riddle. You must be fast about it. I will allow no longer than a single week for you to bring me the solution. What tree is the oldest tree? That's the riddle, I said. Is it the yew tree? It is, groaned the ancient being. Do you know why? The ability to form new epicormic growth from veteran wood. No. A horrible rasping sound followed. The tree was laughing. No, the yew tree is the oldest tree because it goes way back. It goes way back? I don't understand. It goes way back. Spell you backwards. W-E-Y. Way. I didn't tell the you. The way is spelled with an A. It was possible that several decades of the tree's life had been spent crafting the punchline. Very good, I said. You are wise beyond all things of the forest and firmament. Now please, can I talk to you about the hanging man? Speak, but know this, Dryad. You may ask me 3 questions, and no more. Someone died under your branches. Do you know anything about it? The yew cackled. I am the tree of the longbow and the deadly snottleberry. I laughed, and the tree bridled. Dost thou doubt the power of the snottleberry, Dryad? Mark my words, all those who rest beneath my branches soon will die. How soon? Soon. A month, a week, a night? Soon. Within 100 years, everyone. Only soon for you. Raid your short-term memory. Is there anything you remember particularly recently? Can you recall something pressing on your roots? Tree roots were extremely sensitive, far more so than branches. Microscopic hairs bristled at their tips, each only a cell thick, but long and strong enough to push through the surrounding soil. In more neurotic trees, by which I mean poplars, these roots were sensitive enough to feel the landing of a leaf. A quaking aspen grew in the grounds of Pentdown Hall that could distinguish between the fall of cherry blossom and apple. But humans can hear the sound of blood flowing in their ears. They just choose not to. Sometimes unfiltered life is too complicated. If this tree listened to its root hairs and their reports on the progress of worms, the passage of woodlice, and the swelling of the bluebells, it would be driven mad by the million inconsequentialities of the forest floor. However, I hope the bucket was big and unexpected enough to lodge in its root memory. You have had your questions 3, Dryad, said the tree. How long had it been since the forest sentinel had spoken to another creature? I gambled on it being a very long time. You are right, O wise one. I shall take my leave of you, I melded. Adieu. No, not adieu, not adieu just yet. Wait, be not gone. Yes, I remember something on my roots. It pushed down through the cold earth and touched them, pressed heavy. It was wood, but a strange wood, like no other. It was a crossbreed, a scion of chestnut and apple, arcane and peculiar, most heretical. I rained down a furious hail of snottleberries, and it fled. It bothers me no more. I looked to the ground where yew fruits were scattered. Thank you, O most ancient and wise denizen of the grove. Thou truly art the noblest of plants, I melded, and felt the tree thrill with pleasure. And there you go. Thank you for indulging me, just as Albertus indulged his old tree. I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Garden Log. I realised that I was talking a lot about different plants, and there were a lot of plant names quite quickly. So in the description of this episode, I'm going to put just a list of the plants that I was planting this week. And you can go and check those out. You can also go and find that book, Blood is Thicker Than Cider, by Ben Dark, on Amazon, and I think it's on some other retailers as well. And I'll put a link down there to that as well. I'm looking forward to another week in the garden. Now the plants are in, we can start finessing the stuff around them, start getting everything stood up again, start propping those bits of growth that have grown through things, tying in new whips of wisteria and clematis. It's going to be quite good to get back onto the regular round of maintenance. I don't know if any of you will be doing any maintenance in the garden. You might not get out into the garden at all. If you do, get out there, enjoy yourself. If you don't get out there, then also enjoy yourself. I hope that you have a very wonderful week, and I'll see you back here for episode 81 of The Garden Log. Thank you and goodbye.